afternoon. I am so happy to see all of you. Janae Harvey, Child Welfare Bureau Chief, and I am going to take just 1 minute because rumor has it this presentation is full of so much information, it's going to be hard to get done in 3 hours. It would be hard for me to overstate the value of Dr. Amelia Frank-Meyer. She is an important component of our implementation of Family First, kind of our roadmap to where we are headed. And I could go on and on about what you can expect to learn here today. But the truth is, anything you hear today, you already actually know. Because what she is going to tell us about are things that are so primal to all of our wiring and all of the social connections that we walk through this world with. It will resonate due to its truth, its power, and the consistency, the ubiquitousness of how we will all derive meaning from what she is telling us. So nothing short of magic, not trying to get too overstated, but I am so happy that you cleared your schedule today, and I really believe you will leave this room thinking, pondering, musing, and continuing to talk about what you hear today. So with that, magic.
It's better for me when the introduction sounds like, she's okay. Just like you say. And then I don't have anything to live up to. So it's fun to be here with you today. I'm Amelia, and I live up the road, just on the other side of 35W, about 3.5 hours in Minneapolis. So it was really, I think I took 2 turns to get here pretty close. So it's fun to be here with you. I see Janae and some of my other favorite Iowans pretty regularly, every few weeks up in Minneapolis, and I'll tell you more about that towards the end of the presentation. I just want to open up by saying, stating the obvious, which is this is a weird room setup, right? And so I like to kind of walk into the crowd, but I'm going to spend some time with you, and then I'll spend some time with you. So if you're raising your hand and I don't see you, just kind of give a holler or help your friends out. I do really invite you to interact. I'm going to talk a little bit about the human need for belonging and then tell you a little bit about innovations in child welfare that I was a part of that we have happening in many jurisdictions around the country. So if you find yourself with some questions about that, or you just want to raise your hand and say, I think you might be full of it, I'd like to test it out, feel free and do that as well. And we will take one break about halfway through. We'll see how the timing goes, right? So I'm Amelia, I'm the CEO of Alia. Alia is a nonprofit based in the Twin Cities that is focused on helping innovative child welfare leaders to transform the child welfare system. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that, but really we work with systems who are ready for change and interested in change. So I've done the work 30 years and I'm kind of done doing involuntary clients. We really work with people who are on the leading edge of change. I have a bio on the table, so I don't have to get into much of my background. For those of you who are wondering if I know what I'm talking about, you can read on that. Are there any questions before we begin? We're good? All right, I want to start with the obvious, which is ducks. I want to tell you a story about a time when we were on family vacation. So I have 5 kids. My husband was married for 22 years and lost his wife to ovarian cancer. So I have a 33-year-old, a 31-year-old, a 26-year-old, and then together we have a 10 and 11-year-old. And we call those the bigs and the littles, right? Now we've added some grands. And so that'll be relevant as I tell stories throughout the day because you'll get confused otherwise. So I had the littles on vacation in Michigan up in Traverse City. And so we live in Minneapolis. You drive across the state of Wisconsin, put the car on the SS Badger, and then float across the lake. And then we drove up north to Traverse City. How many of you have been there before? Right? Just gorgeous. Voted one of the most beautiful places in America. I could go on and on, but that's a different presentation. So there we were. ready to go on vacation after an 8-hour drive with the van filled with stuff. The kids finally get to the hotel, the van doors swing open, and they go running into the water. So now they're waist deep in Lake Michigan. I have not unpacked the life preservers. They don't yet know how to swim. They were about 3 or 4 years old. And I'm starting to panic, right? I've been on vacation for 20 seconds, and I'm going to win Mom of the Year award here real shortly as my kids are in the lake. So I did what mamas of toddlers do, and I created a scene, right? I said, babies, get over here. You're not even going to believe this. And they came running. And I said, do you see this Mama Ducky? Well, yes, Mama, we do. And do you see how those babies are lined up right behind her, following her every which way she goes? Yes, Mama, we do. And I say, why would those babies do that? Any idea? What happens to babies that don't stay close to their mama? A big eagle could come eat them. They might not know where it's safe to sleep. And I said, that's right, those babies know safest place is close to mama. Now, I know they're going to need therapy for that later, but in the moment, I did save them from drowning, so I figure, you know, you got to weigh your chances there. So what I was telling them is what I want to talk to you about, which is from the second those duckies are born, right, the second they're born, they're hatched in the field, they go looking for the mama. Where's the protector? Where's the protector? Where's the protector? There you are. And in the animal kingdom, we call it imprinting, and we follow that protector every which way they go. They don't have to be taught that. They don't go through instructions on how to stay close to mama class. They don't need information on why it's important. They know it in their bodies the second they are born, right? And that is really going to help those ducks to advance their chances of survival, you know? So if they don't stay close to mama, their chances of survival greatly diminish, and they know it from the second they're born. And it's so important that they will continue to look for a protector if mama's not there. Where's the mama? Where's the mama? No mama? Then what do, right? They will go to the next living thing. They will find the goat or the pig or the farmer himself. Doesn't matter. They are connecting to a protector, and they will follow that protector around. It's really a fun thing to Google and watch on YouTube if you get a chance about imprinting on non-maternal figures. And so what we know about this in the animal kingdom is this is how we ensure survival, is that we come in the animal kingdom imprinting on the caregiver, on the protector, and in the human family, this is called attachment. It turns out that human young are the most vulnerably born mammals on the planet. It's kind of surprising. Other mammals are born, they can go for a swing in the jungle, they can crawl to the food source, and off they go. They're ready to go. But not our babies, right? Our babies are born and they lay there and cry, right? And if another human being does not come to that human young, what happens to that baby? Right? They don't make it, and they know it from the second they are born. From the second they're born, they know if someone isn't here to protect me, I'm not gonna make it. It's so important that if different caregivers come or a caregiver does not consistently come, they can get messages subconsciously in their neurobiology that says, your chances of making it here, not very good. And they begin to shut down their organs, fail to grow and develop, and fail to thrive. That's how incredibly important this idea is, right? Just to give you another example of that, I had foster parents. I used to run a treatment foster care agency in 60 counties in Wisconsin and 30 in Minnesota. And we had foster parents where the foster mom developed flesh-eating virus disease, right? She got a hangnail and lost her arm. So I keep Band-Aids with me like all the time now. I'm totally freaked out by this, but it's true. And they were in the burn unit in the hospital for weeks. And I went to visit and I talked to Earl, the foster dad, and I was like, how's it going, Earl? He's like, well, I'm gonna have to sell all the calves. It's like, sell all the calves? You guys have tons of neighbors and friends. What's the story? Somebody can't come and take care of the calves? Oh yeah. We have people who can do the morning chores. We have people who can do the afternoon chores. We have people who can do the evenings, but we don't have people who can do all of the chores consistently. And if the same person doesn't consistently come to feed the calves, they will begin to fail to thrive and die. So I will lose the lot of them if I don't sell them soon. And I'm thinking to myself, how is it we know this about cattle? And we have not yet figured this out about our babies. And the truth of the matter is we do know it about our babies. You know it and I know it. And we've known it in the research for almost a century and in indigenous wisdom for centuries. But our response and our system isn't set up on this knowledge base. It's not set up on the knowledge base of how critical it is to have an uninterrupted sense of belonging. That is how humans thrive. And we're going to get more into that in a minute, but babies know it, humans know it from the second they're born. And if they don't have that, their brain chemistry actually changes if they believe that they're responsible for themselves, because the second message after, I have no protector, I'm responsible for myself is, and that's not going to go well. That is not going to go well. And so the defense response kicks in. So it turns out that all of us have come tethered to an actual another human. I can give you a second if you want to verify my facts. Right? Everybody's got a belly button? Regardless of what you know or think about that human, all of you are here because a human actually grew an organ to ensure that you would be here. And that tethering, that literal tethering to another human, that lifelong need never goes away. Everything about humans is built for connection. Everything about us is built for connection. And that's why to thrive and survive, children must have a safe and secure, nurturing attachment to a protector. And that is what we know for sure. And I'll tell you how we know. So babies come ready and hardwired for attachment and connection. They come in a way that makes sure that we connect with them. So babies' eyes are actually abnormally large for the size of their heads. They grow into their eyes. They're too big at birth. And that's why they look up at you with those big old saucers, and you just start to like, oh, so cute, right? And then they come with a smell that I don't know what it's called. I've started to call it Eau de Heaven. It's like a fresh new smell. You know the first thing you do when you hold a baby, you smell its head, admit it, you do. Fresh baby smell. Their skin is so soft that you just want to hold and caress them and touch them, right? They have these mirror neurons that when we smile, they smile back, or you stick out their tongue and they do it back, or they start to laugh, it makes you laugh. Everything about us is wired for connection, and that connection is essential because for those of you who have raised or loved a baby, you know it's like some kind of heroic work to get that job done, right? You feel like you're part of some kind of government experiment on how little sleep you can get and actually still make it. And so when the baby's crying at 4 o'clock in the morning and you have to get up again to feed the baby, right? There has to be a very powerful drive that overpowers your survival needs in order to continue to make that happen. And that very powerful drive, that connection, is attachment. It's the love that babies come with to draw us in to do the hard work of raising them. And that's why this important connection is why children, including right from birth, are asking with their interaction with the environment. They're testing their environment to answer these important questions about the safety and security of that bond, the safety and security of that attachment. They're wanting to know, am I safe? Am I lovable? And can I trust others to meet my needs? Am I safe? Am I lovable? Can I trust others to meet my needs? And you had this same experience when you were young. And the answers you receive to these questions determine how you show up in every single relationship you will ever have, right? It determines what kind of a parent you'll be, what kind of a partner you'll be. It determines what kind of employee or supervisor you'll be, or how you respond when someone cuts you off in traffic, right? All those things are determined about your lens, right? Is the world safe? Can I trust other people to take care of me, right? Am I lovable? Am I worthy of love? Come on, do you know the amount of therapy dollars that have been spent on answers that didn't go well here? Right? These things are things that follow us well into adulthood, which is why it's so incredibly important to get these answers firmly, squarely in the yes zone as early as possible. Right? Because we get a window to get this hardwired into the brain as, yes, you're safe. Yes, you're lovable. Yes, you can trust me to meet your needs, right? That's an incredibly important thing that happens. And really, it mimics the attachment cycle, right? I have a need, I express the need, you meet the need, I feel relief, and trust develops. And you all are doing this all day long. In your work, who are your favorite people? Oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't get this done. It's okay, I can help you. Oh, thank goodness. You're my favorite to work with, right? And you're doing it in your homes, in your workplace. This is part of how humans develop trust and connection that helps us to thrive throughout our lives. It's also why the number one most stressful event for a child, the worst thing that can happen to a child, is the death of their parent. And the second worst thing that can happen to them is to be separated from their parent, right? The death of a parent or separation of a parent. And here's what I want you to understand about this. The worst for you, equivalent for you, is the loss of your child. And if you don't have children, it's the loss of your partner. And if you don't have a partner, it is the loss of your parents. And which one of you could withstand multiple losses of this nature over and over, right? So let's just imagine that a child was home with their parents. Well, imagine two-parent family. And even if they just had 2 placements, right? Just 2. So home, placement, placement. That brings me in my second placement to the loss of 4 parents, right? And the potential loss of 2 more. So which one of you could withstand the kinds of losses I talked about of children or partners or parents 4 times over and not be in the back of your closet or not coming out at all? Which one of you could still work your case plan, get to school, sit still, learn something? Which one of you could do that? Because I know I couldn't, right? One of those kinds of losses and it'd be all over. The whole show is over, right? And so just thinking about the intensity from the perspective of a child, basically what we're saying is the thing they need to be okay, the thing they need to thrive and survive, when that is taken, it translates to the brain as though their very lives are at risk. And now, friends, there's a really important part of this slide I want you to understand. It is missing a key adjective, right? It says, the number one most stressful event for a child is the death of a, what kind of a parent, friends?
Loving parent?
Oh.
There is no adjective there. That's right, any parent. Any parent. It does not have to be a loving parent. And that is a false assumption upon which we have set our system. It does not have to be a loving parent. Some protector is better than no protector. Ask anybody who's in a gang. Ask anybody who's in a domestic violence relationship. Being completely unprotected is worse than inadequate protection. And unless your very life is at risk, any gradation beyond that is better than nothing, right? This is what we know and what we're learning and why the premise upon which we've set our work is not making good sense and is not getting us the outcomes that we desire. So it is the death of a parent, not a great parent, not a perfect parent, not even a good parent, a parent. And if you don't believe me, some of you had terrible relationships with your parents. Terrible, harmful, hurtful even, right? Devastating. And when they pass away, it is still an extraordinarily challenging event. You are still mourning that loss in ways that surprise you. You are still in therapy, working through the loss of what they couldn't be, what you wish they would have been, at the opportunity gone for what they can never be to you, because you still needed it, even if they can't give it to you. And you work with these children. I know these kids, right? I worked group home for 10 years. I had a sibling set of 3 who were kept like dogs in the basement, made to eat out of dog dishes, in cages. Where did they want to go? Where? Home. They wanted to go home. Not because they got used to the chaos, not because they learned to love the craziness, because we are all biologically hardwired with a homing device. If something terrible happened here right now and you all had to run for your lives out the front door, you would run in the direction of your home automatically. When the towers came down, people ran out and ran home in the direction of their home. It's part of our survival mechanism. it comes with you that says, this is my connection. Talk to people who were adopted as infants and spent their lives longing for the reconnection, right? It is hardwired in us. This is why when mama's okay, or daddy, or primary caregiver, when they're okay in that order, then I'm okay. Why? Because if mama's the protector and you're coming through her, if you hurt her, you're coming for me. So this is why domestic violence is so insidious. If I just see mama be hurt, it's the same as you threatening my life, because my protector represents me. You know, children when they're young developmentally don't even know they're separate from us. They fall down, they're like, am I hurt? Right? They're looking to see if you're crying because they don't even know they're separate. So when you attack protector, it's the same to my brain as though you are coming for my life, right? That's why on the ACEs questionnaire, and I hope most of you, raise your hand if you've heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Okay, I think we're probably at about 60%. So the rest of you are, who raised your hand because you didn't want to not raise it, or it's been a while, or you're not really sure, but you've got to go learn more, right? It's the seminal piece of research in our field at this point on trauma. I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but essentially, it's about the childhood trauma children experience. There's only 10 questions, but one of them is about the mama. Was the mama ever attacked with a gun or a knife or hit so hard that it left marks, right? Just the one, because it's the same as if it happens to you. This is how important the protective relationship is. Because it turns out we humans are incredibly vulnerable. We're super vulnerable, right? We're born the most vulnerable mammal, and we kind of remain that way. We have to do things like sleep and eat and use the bathroom, right? We get sick and we get sad and we get lonely. Sometimes we get so sick, we need someone to bring us food because we're too sick to get up. Or we need someone to go get the medicine. Or sometimes we get so sad or so lonely that we need someone to come to the house and say over the bed, I promise it'll get better. And I've got you until then, right? We need people around us. So we humans are a tribal community-based people. We live in connection. We live in family. We do not live in isolation. And when we are all alone, we know we're vulnerable, and our brains do not do well. We do not thrive when we feel like we don't belong or we are in it on our own. That is the same as a death threat to humans, yeah? And so, thinking about this, I want to tell you a story about my Noe. This is a couple years ago. He's put on like 6 inches since then, I think. He's almost as tall as I am, and he's 10. And so we were on vacation, and Noah said to me as we were sitting there having breakfast, he said, hey, Mama, how many people are there in the world? It's like, I don't know. They didn't teach me that in social work school. Let's ask the Google, right? So we're Googling, how many people in the world? And then he says, yeah, but how many have you seen? I was like, well, not like all the people in the world, Noe, like less, okay? Yeah, well, how many have you met? Well, fewer than the whole population of the world, right? And, well, how many do you really know, he says. And this is what he's trying to get at. He thinks for a minute, and he looks over at me, and he says, yeah, but you belong to me. I said, that's right, Noe. So Noah came 10 weeks early, and he was in the hospital for 6 weeks while I was home with a 1-year-old. And so he's constantly testing that attachment bond. He's constantly checking it. He'll say things like, hey, Mama, if we were by train tracks, and I'm like, yeah, Noah, I would, but let's just stay away from the train tracks. But really, it's not great, okay? Or a regular question throughout the day is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love me? And I always answer repeatedly, 11. That's the correct answer. And now he's in 5th grade math, so he's doing things like this to me. On a scale of 1 to 20, how much do you love me? And I say 21. He goes, that is not proportional math, Mom. That's less than 11 of 10. The correct answer is 22. So basically, I'm telling you this because Noah is checking the connection, right? He's saying, you go train people, you meet a lot of people, you see a lot of people, you know where you're coming home, right? You know where you're coming home. And that's his way of saying, you're my protector on duty, right? "You're my protector on duty." Yes, that's right. And that has to be affirmed for him. And because no one knows that I would jump in front of the train, that I do belong to him and he to me, he knows that if he needed me, if something for some reason happened and this boy needed me, I would be there, right? So let's just think about it this way. You all have a whole lot of LinkedIn connections. That's my guess. Lots of people so connected, right? And a whole lot of Facebook connections. Many, many, many connections. Let's imagine you got really sick, right? You might get a few, sending you thoughts and prayers, a little hand icon. You might get a lots of love, right? But how many people would go further for you and actually pick up the phone and call you? And how many of those many, many connections might actually send you a card or send you flowers? And how many of that group actually would come visit you in the hospital? And then what if those hospital days weren't 4 days, but turned into 4 months before you could get up and walk out of there? What if it was 4 months? Who do you know who would put the whole shebang on hold and sit there with you until you could walk out? Right? No one knows that if he needed something, the whole thing's over, right? If I had to, I'd sell the house, I'd quit the job, but I'm sitting next to Noah for 4 months or 4 years, if that's what it takes. And he knows it. And because he knows it, he can be creative and play and engage in connections with others because he doesn't have to worry about his own survival. He knows I've got it. He knows he's got a protector on duty. And if you don't have at least one name in that little bottom square that says they put it all on hold for 4 months, because I'll tell you what, I got great friends. They have families, they have kids, right? My sisters have families. So they can't be there like I'm talking about in the same way. And so if you don't have at least one name that is in that box, you are likely not thriving either, right? Because we humans need to know somebody has our backs no matter what, right? That's how we thrive and survive, especially when you're young. And if you don't have that, if somebody doesn't have your back, no matter what, when you are young, it dramatically changes what you are able to do, the way you think and how your brain is wired. And it sets you on a trajectory of constantly being engaged in spending for your own survival. And when you are spending for your own survival, you cannot do the things we all want to do, which is trust other people, connect, create, play, all of the good stuff in life. And this is really how we have set up our system, is that it is based on physical safety. And so if a child is safe in this home, and then in this home, and then in this home, we say they're safe. But they are not safe because they are not tethered. They are untethered. And they know, because they've had their sense of belonging broken, they are waiting in a state of psychological terror to hear, and they know it can come at any time. Pack it up, we're moving again. They know it. So we have fooled ourselves into thinking that if they are safe in a home, they're safe, but they are not. They are living in psychological terror because they do not have a complete trust that someone will find them lovable, will keep them safe, and will ensure that their needs are met. It is a person at a time, and that is untethered. And when you are untethered, you are not faring well as a human. And that is exactly how we have set up our system. Inadvertently, we have created orphans through our systemic practices because we untether them with the idea that they'll be placed with a better family. And we have told ourselves for years that this is not a good situation, so we'll put them here and it'll go great. And now we know. It's been long enough, we have the evidence. What we know is that one not great family, even one pretty bad family, is way better than 5 good families. Humans need an uninterrupted sense of belonging. And so even though it's not ideal, as long as it's not life-threatening, right? What we know is that multiple moves in multiple cases does such incredible psychological damage that sets kids on a trajectory of being unable to trust other humans. And if you cannot trust other humans, you can't partner, you can't parent, you can't work. And that is like the whole point, isn't it? If you can't love other humans, isn't that why we're all here? And when we move and repeatedly disrupt that sense of attachment, we create young people who have a dramatically diminished capacity to trust and form connection, which is what human thriving is made of. To feel safe, we humans must belong. We must belong. We find safety in connection. Look, my Josie just started 6th grade in middle school. And now we're entering there aren't enough seats at the lunch table phase. Right? If you want to know if not belonging is a threat to your survival, ask any middle school girl who doesn't have a seat at the lunch table. Ask any middle school girl who wakes up with a big pimple and can't go to school because her peers will judge her. She will be outcasted and be lacking the protection she needs to thrive and survive. And we wonder, like, why is your flyaway hair or that zit the end of the world? It's so not the end of the world. Yes, it is. Because her brain is telling her, if I don't fit in, if I don't belong, I don't have the safety of others, and I am untethered out there in the open, and anyone can come for me, and they will. Because they will see me as vulnerable. That's why public speaking is terrifying to people. Because if you stand up in front of people and you say something dumb, or worse yet, forget what you were going to say, or fall on your face, and the whole crowd judges you and extricates you, and you don't feel like you belong, it feels to your brain like you're going to die. It's the same thing. You know? We humans thrive in connection. And when we do not feel safe and lovable, it literally changes our brain. And for the sake of discussion, we'll call that change survival brain, right? So we go into this thing called survival brain, which basically says, hey, I got nobody to protect me, so you know who I can trust? Looking at her. Yes, ma'am?
Quick question. Does having a consistent worker through those placements affect tethering at all?
So, I love the question. Having a consistent worker is like having a best friend in terms of its benefit. It helps, but it's not the same, because you are not the person who is going to be there the rest of their lives no matter what. That's not it, right? You're not going to quit your job to sit in the hospital room 24 hours a day for 4 months. That's not happening. And so it's helpful, and I am a huge fan of that. So when I ran a treatment foster care agency, we had people at caseloads all over the state because we followed the kids, not the caseload, right? It's helpful. It's helpful. It's not the same as what I'm talking about, right? So it adds to it, but you still are in need of a permanent, uninterrupted protector tethering. And so in survival brain, your brain is telling you, you know what, I can only trust myself. I can't trust other people. And so you begin to push everybody away because you can't make the assessment fast enough whether or not people are safe, right? And everyone and everything becomes an immediate threat to your survival because you cannot get to those judgments quickly enough. So it turns out this shows up in adulthood. Some of you, I'm going to describe you right now, or someone who you are married to or partnered to, or used to be married to or partnered to. Yeah? Because this gets in the way of long-lasting relationships. And so what we know is that this happens, right? So I'm fine, I'm in connection with you, but the second I get an indication that you are untrustworthy, the second I get an indication that you don't follow through at 100%, that I can't always count on you no matter what, a wall of ice goes up and boom, you're out. I cut you off like that. Does that sound familiar? Here's the bad news, friends. Humans are unreliable. We mess it up. We forget. We're late. We don't do it the way you want us to. We humans are unreliable, which means every single person is going to come to a place where they disappoint you. Every person is going to disappoint you eventually. And if you can't live in the ambiguity of relationships that say, it's still okay, I can still hang in, if your protective response is going into survival brain that says, boom, you're out, then you live an incredibly lonely life. Incredibly lonely. And what we know is that loneliness is deadly to humans. It is as deadly as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. It will take 8 years off of your life to be lonely. And just as an aside, 47% of Americans report feeling lonely. 46% report feeling they don't belong, right? We have an epidemic of loneliness, and we are creating it generation after generation in the way we do our work, with 670,000 children a year in this country being subject to having their connections broken and stretched beyond repair. And in our disconnections, the thing is that what happens is when I harden my heart, right? When I hurt, because it hurts too much to be connected and have it broken, connected and have it broken. So a normal, natural response of the brain is to diminish my capacity to connect. I just leave you over there because it's too painful to have you right up here. So I harden up my heart. But it turns out you can't harden part of your heart. So now I can't feel you either. It's not just that I can't feel my own stuff, I can't feel you. And you know what that means? I can do anything I want to you because I can't feel the pain. And so what happens is we create these kids who are incredibly dangerous, who we're calling 30 and 40 and 50 and 70 placements in all 50 states trying to find a place that can keep them safe enough because we have created such inability to feel empathy, right? And we call it, it's reactive attachment disorder. But there is nothing disorderly about that. It's a perfectly orderly human response to disconnection, which is why we have to treat severing relational connections like a nuclear option, because the consequences are nuclear fallout. It is the fallout. It is the worst thing we can do to a human. So just for the sake of illustration, I'll tell you that we have kind of a runway of regulation, right? So if we say that 0 is like super Zen calm, right? We're in a meditative state of calm at 0. And 60 is just losing it in a very, very embarrassing way, okay? 60 and 0. What happens after you experience that disconnection, when you go into survival brain and you don't know that you're safe, when you start thinking, I have to take care of me, then you start getting revved up and amped up and you lose your runway. So then your new set point's like at 45 or 50 or 58, because I have to be in fight, flight, freeze. I have to be ready for the attack because I know I'm vulnerable and no one's got my back. I'm untethered. So I walk around ready for the fight, right? That's what happens. We lose our runway. So here's an example of that. I was at the public pool with my daughter Josie, and I was looking for a new suit. A woman walked by with daisies on her suit, and I looked over, I promise you, for like 1/18 of 1 second. Just enough to notice, like, oh, cute daisies. I'm chatting with this other mom at the pool, chatty, nice suit. I didn't say anything, I just looked, went back to talking. Yeah, so this woman in the cute suit, I'm guessing we had a set point of about 58. So what did she do when I made a momentary notice of her passing? Anyone?
What are you looking at?
Yeah, what are you looking at? And if you had a set point of like 30 or something like that, you might say, what are you looking at? No, she was at 58. So it sounded more like, what are you looking at? Come on over here, you got something to say to me? Say it now, come on. And I did this, right, which is automatic. It's a human response. I show you all of my vital organs. You could take me out right now. Right? That's why we do that. It's me, my brain saying to your brain, I mean you no harm, right? I am not a threat to you. I made myself smaller. I moved back. And I just said, it's a super cute suit. And I went back to talking to the other mom. And Josie leaned over, because she's raised by a social worker, and whispered to me, Mama, I'm not sure she got all the love she needed when she was little. That's what it looks like in grown-ups. That's what it looks like. You can't regulate, right? Your brain says, it's not safe here. You're not lovable. You can't trust other people. Boom! You go right into defense mode, right into survival mode. And that right there, what I just described to you, in my professional guesstimation, is the end of more marriages than anything else. It's the inability to sit in the gray, the inability to do ambiguity, right? The second I start to feel that I can't trust, I am out. I am out. And it takes a lot of work to get back in, a lot of work. And that is a trauma response. So when you see people who have a very small stimulus, it's a little thing, but the response is really big. It's an announcement that you have touched a place of pain from before. That's old stuff that someone else did. And something about the way you said it, or the way you smell, or the way you look, or the words you use, brought them back to a time of old pain. And all of the fear and the rage and the anger and the shame they felt back there, boom, comes into the present moment and they're reliving it. That's a trauma response. And the good news of the day, along with the troubling news, is that connections build resilience and protection, right? Because it's not your what's really, it's your who's that matter most. So if you got the worst news you could ever get, you know, your phone rang right now, bad news, or the best news you could imagine, the first thing you would do is tell another human. You would lean to the person next to you, or you'd run out in the hall and call somebody, but you would want to share that news, because that connection serves as buffering to the inevitable ups and downs of life, right? Great things are going to happen to all of us. Amazing, wonderful things. It's a great, wonderful world. And terrible, horrible, super hard stuff is also going to happen. That's a part of being human. And the way we navigate and negotiate the inevitable ups and downs is by being in connection to others, is by our connections buffering it. It's people saying to you, it will be okay, when you're not sure it will. It's people making sure by sitting at your bedside that it will be okay when you can't do it for yourself, right? Connections are the things that buffer the inevitableness of life. Bruce Perry talks about the most traumatic aspects of all disasters is the shattering of human connections. Said another way, there is nothing worse that can happen to you than losing your connections. There is nothing worse that can happen to you than having your human connections broken, right? That's the worst thing. And if you look at the TV and you see people standing after a tornado or a hurricane, right in front of everything they've ever bought their whole lives, it's all in tiny little pieces behind them. Family heirlooms, pictures, everything they've ever worked to buy is in rubble. And what are they saying? They're not on the news going, that couch, man, I love that couch. I had worn me a little divot right there where I'd come home every night. Oh, I love that couch. Nobody's talking about their stuff. Friends, entire cities in California have burned to the ground. They're gone. Gone. And the people are still on TV hugging each other going, we're going to rebuild together. Everything they've ever had is gone. And they're still saying, we're going to be okay together, right? Because you can lose everything. You can lose everything if you have people with you. If you have the love of others, the connection of others, you can withstand literally any storm, right? And the bad news of the day is that trauma disrupts our capacity to connect. So the thing that is most precious and most healing is the exact place that trauma goes for. So the thing you need to heal is the thing you can't do, right? And so the earlier we can avoid that, and the earlier we can reinstate the capacity to heal, the better life is, right? And if it goes too long and we fully diminish a human's capacity to connect, then we're basically housing them for safety for the rest of their life. That's what we're doing, because they can't connect with others. And this is a normal response. It's a normal, healthy response of a brain to have a profound loss and to harden up your ability to connect. So if you all went home from the training and found your partners in compromising positions with your best friends, when you show up for your next partner, assuming you're done, you're not going to be like, it's totally fine if you're an hour late from work. I don't need to know where you are. Oh, I can't see your email? It's okay. No, your heart will harden up and you will become some kind of a password stealing, breaking into Facebook, going through your wallet or purse while you're in the shower kind of freak. That's a normal response. If you just show up with your next partner, you're like, it's okay, I'm totally fine. I trust you implicitly. Then something's wrong with you. Right? It's a normal, orderly response to shut that business down when you get hurt like that, which is exactly what happens to our kids. Every single time they have a diminished capacity to connect. And depending on how it happened or how young they were or the other protective adults, all of those buffering things, which is where your handy social worker continuity comes in, depending on those things, depends how bad it is. But isolation for human beings is not only painful, but fatal. I know this is crazy. I used to draw it on napkins and I just got tired of it. So I'm going to walk you through it. It'll be okay. But basically, this is a diagram of our current system functioning, okay? So if we have a family of origin and there is trauma, neglect, abuse, or safety risk, I assume that we do everything we can to go keep that family safely together. We deploy every resource we have to keep them together. In the event we cannot keep them safely together, and we do removals, and we have an out-of-home placement, that involves enormous grief and loss for the parents and for the children. Children and humans do their pain. They do not talk their pain. They do it in pain-based behaviors. That looks like truancy, depression, anger, running away, self-harm, aggression, sexualized behavior, anxiety, numbing it with drugs. They do their pain, their grief, and their loss. When children act in this way, adults are like, that is very undesirable and risky. We have to do something about that. And we're helpers, so we want to make it stop. So what do we do, right? We use our traditional interventions. We go into our traditional toolbox. We use anger management classes. You're angry. You should learn how to control that. We do things like use psychotropic medications to numb the responses. We use punishments, loss of privileges, expulsion, suspension, detention. You need to learn how to manage your behavior in a behavior management way. We have sanctions or community service or juvenile detention. We might send you away to a residential or alternative school. So what is in common in the way we typically intervene now is this toolbox, which is our old toolbox. And our old toolbox has these things in common: blame, shame, disconnect, and punish. Those are the tools we use. Or we send them to talk about it in therapy. Comes in three kinds: individual, group, and family. But we all know that kids do their pain. They don't talk it, at least in the beginning. And so what we have are these traditional interventions. We try the traditional interventions, the negative behavior continues, and then we move placements. And that is how we are systemically re-traumatizing our kids over and over, because the exact same thing that caused them the pain, that they are doing the behaviors, the pain-based behaviors, is in fact our treatment. So our treatment is to isolate you or send you away or blame or shame or punish, which is the reason why you're acting out the pain. Your disconnection is also our intervention. So the source of your pain is how we intervene. It would be like taking, a war veteran and for treatment, putting him in a room and showing him war videos all day. We replicate the source of the pain as a form of treatment. And we wonder, why aren't they getting better? So children and really all people do their pain, grief, loss, and trauma. They don't really talk about it, but our primary form of intervention is sending them to talk about it. And they are unable, in most cases, as a primary form of intervention. So these are natural, normal responses to what's happened to them. This is how you would respond. how I would respond. If I came tonight and took what I could and put it in a garbage bag and took you to go live with very well trained, well background check strangers, I would quickly, I promise you, meet a lot of diagnostic criteria. You would hear words you hadn't heard in a while. I would quickly meet the criteria for depression or mood disorder or anxiety or antisocial personality disorder, I bet, real quickly, right? And so these are normal, natural responses. So as you know, we're moving into a new way of looking at this and seeing pain-based behaviors, and instead of saying, hey, what's wrong with you, we're saying, hey, what happened to you? And that's one iteration. But the next one is, and how do I do things differently because I know what happened to you? It's not just enough to know, right? I'm sure you've been to several handfuls of trauma-informed training, right? And we're all informed now, and then we go back to work and we do what we've always done. And so it is time for us to do something significantly different, because just knowing is not enough. We have to do it differently. We are really faced with this moral dilemma right now because families are struggling. And it turns out, friends, all families struggle. Mine does, yours does, all families struggle. It's just that some people have more resources. So when my family was struggling, I could hire a parent coach, right? I had family I could go to. I teach trauma-informed parenting. I have written chapters in books on trauma-informed parenting. And I promise you, if you caught me on video, I would lose my job. It gets ugly because parenting is hard business, even when you're set up for success. So family struggle is all families do, and we have insufficient resources to support them. We have insufficient ways to intervene early enough, and a cultural need to punish. When people do bad things to children, we have a cultural need for them to be punished. We have this old adage of sort of the deserving poor we all learned about in social work history classes. Well, it's the deserving parent. Those parents don't deserve their kids, right? I hear that all the time. Let me tell you something. I did not start out as a parent advocate. I started out making sure that all children had permanence, right? I started out making sure that children lived in permanent families because I knew the importance of belonging. But it turns out, through all of my research and decades of work in this field, hands-on direct work and studying this work, what I have come to know for sure is that what every child on the face of the earth needs is for their parents to be okay. They need that more than your therapies. They need it more than your evidence-based practices. They need it more than anything you're doing. More than anything. They need their parents to be okay. So even if you hate parents, and believe me, I know people who do, and you are burned out and jaded by seeing too much of the bad side of parenting. But even for people who hate parents, you cannot claim to love children if you don't help their parents to be okay, because it's all they need, it's all they want. And no matter how you deliver it, no matter how great your temporary or stand-in is, it will never, ever do for them what having their own parents be okay will do. And that is where our energy and our work needs to be, is in helping parents to safely parent. Helping parents to safely parent, because we are also hypocrites. Because we know those parents are our kids in grown-up bodies. We know that in order to do that kind of stuff to kids, you had to have had it done to you. You had to grow up without feeling safe and lovable and knowing people could trust you, right? That you could trust them. You had to have that happen. And then you're now in a body, and once you hit 18, we are all out of empathy. Now you don't deserve your kids. Now you deserve punishment. So don't claim to care about kids if you don't care about their parents. Because it is one and the same. It's the same. They are deeply interconnected. And helping kids heal means you've got to help their parents heal. And I'm not saying that kids need to stay in unsafe environments. Sometimes helping their parents heal means they've got to come out of the home in the temporary. But right now when we do that, we ignore or separate or punish those parents. We never come back for them and help them to do the healing they need. And what we've created is a scenario in which we can't fish the babies out of the river fast enough. Because if I take the baby and provide all of my therapies and treatments and interventions to the child, and I do nothing for the family, I'm creating an opportunity to have 6 more of these babies that I need to fish out of the river to begin with. Not to mention the excruciating primal wound I have created for this child who will struggle to heal. And for the parent, it's the worst thing that can happen to the parent. And so why wouldn't I use drugs to numb that? Why wouldn't I just throw in the towel and not get it to the things I need to, right? It's a no-win situation. And so if we care about the kids, we've got to attend to the parents and not just focus on the physical safety, but understand the emotional and relational safety that comes from connection. Instead, we end up severing those relational connections, which result in a primal wound, and we create a new family, or many families, or no family, for 23,000 children a year in our country who have nobody, totally untethered, totally, which is, for humans, a death sentence. And we have insufficient resources to look for these people who are already trusted, people who the child knows and loves or to whom they're related. So I made it my work to find permanence for kids. When I took over the foster care agency, 38% of our kids left to permanent families. And when I left, 84% did. And I'm not talking about the easy kids. I'm talking about now 25-year-olds who spend time in Rikers. We all have 100 to 300 living relatives on this planet. I don't buy it when you tell me kids have nobody. I don't believe you. I have never seen it. So are we willing to do what it takes? That's really the question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you see this the same with delinquent kids?
Mm-hmm.
That's a yes.
That is a yes. And I love the question. So delinquent kids are just kids who have had trauma, who got in trouble for it, right? So I did this whole spiel with a group of judges, and everybody's like, okay, I get it. And then one judge said, I totally get it, Amelia, but how do I know, the kids who come to my bench, how do I know which ones have trauma and which ones are just naughty? And I was like, this is so easy. If they're in front of your bench, they've had trauma, right? This is so easy. Because our natural state of being, I mean, you know, there's testing of limits and the regular things kids do, the things you did, the things I did, you know? That's sort of normal development stuff of testing limits. But when they're doing the kinds of things that land them in those situations, or because they come from populations who are under a microscope and they end in front of the bench simply because of their race and the attention on them and the implicit and explicit bias that they're facing, right? What we know is that those kids also, I'm talking about all of those kids, all of them. There is a tiny little handful of kids I'm not talking about, which may have a genetic disorder, congenital challenges that might actually be neuroscience related. Those kids I'm not talking about. But the kids who are delinquent, abused, neglected, all of the above, those fit into this category, and I mean them. Those are my kids. That's your kids. So, children experience trauma, which result in losses that must be grieved. Raise your hand if you know Darla Henry or the 357 model. Okay, so I don't promote models, right? I, several years ago, did a sort of an anthropological review of about 40 different models because I feel like our workforce has got major initiative fatigue. It's like, you know, structured decision making and science of safety and culture of safety, and they just keep coming and coming, and we're all certified, we go to trainings, and we don't know how to fit them together. And I'll talk about that in a little bit related to a different slide, except one model, and that is the 357 model by Dr. Darla Henry, which is a model of grief loss and trauma healing for children who are raised in out-of-home care. And that is how we went from 38 to 84%, is by using that model to help heal the relational trauma in combination with family finding. So family finding alone without relational trauma healing, personally, my opinion, I find irresponsible. And so helping them to be able to connect is an important part of the puzzle. So I want to switch just a little bit and talk about the grief of disconnection for our youth. So disenfranchised grief is the kind of grief that we experience when a loss is incurred that cannot be openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. So these are the kinds of losses that Hallmark doesn't have like a section for, right? It's the kind of losses like if you've had a miscarriage, or if you were dating someone that you couldn't really tell somebody about and broke up, right? It's the kind of stuff that happens where you have to bear the loss by yourself because we don't have social rituals for them. There, you know, when your friend's partner dies, you can call any floral shop. They'll know just what to say. They have just the right cards. They know what color flowers should go. Hallmark will have a card, and you know what to do. You know, that's how it goes. But in disenfranchised grief, it's kind of this secret grief, right? It's the grief people don't really recognize. And this is what our kids experience, is disenfranchised grief. In disenfranchised grief, the relationships are unrecognized, right? So we say they've had 3 placements. We don't say they've lost 6 parents, right? So the relationships are unrecognized. The loss is unrecognized, and the griever is unrecognized. So we don't refer to foster children as being in grief, or grievers, or responding to their behaviors as a normal, natural response to grief or loss. We don't talk about them that way, and people don't acknowledge the grief. And I don't know if I said this in the beginning, and I apologize, but you'll get this PowerPoint when we're done, okay? So, and anything else you want, frankly, you can have it all. Please spread it around. So relationships are unrecognized, and loss is unrecognized, and the griever is unrecognized. So they feel unseen and unheard. So they're just in this enormous amount of pain, grieving these losses, but nobody recognizes it as grief. Instead, what happens is they get blamed and stigmatized for their grief. So it's the loss is stigmatized. You know, they blew out of 3 placements, right? Not they're grieving the loss of 2 sets of parents. It's a totally different flop. And so they are stigmatized, and the loss is stigmatized, and people don't really understand it. So instead, they are blamed and shamed for that loss, that they couldn't make it work. Their behaviors were so bad, they had to be moved. So now they're experiencing, really, right, let's go back, the worst or second worst thing that could ever happen to them. They're experiencing it over and over and over. People don't get it. They don't really see it as a loss. And they blame, shame, label, diagnose, and stigmatize them for the normal, natural responses to what happened to them. And their kids, just to add that little element. This is another kind of loss, right? So if you think about the most traumatic events that could happen to you, right? We had, you guys are close enough, you might know Jacob Wetterling. Do you know his story? So we had in Minnesota a child who was abducted, Jacob. 20 years ago. And they just recently solved the mystery. But in the meantime, right, so his mom is Patty. So Jacob's abducted, right, and they do a whole search party for weeks. They look, they can't find him. So what's Patty supposed to do then? You know, on week 4? She like what, clean the house? No, because she should be looking for Jacob. She go back to work? It's completely irrelevant. She should be looking for Jacob, right? So it's like this kind of ambiguous loss where there's no closure. I mean, what do? Send her a card? There's no card. There's no card for that, and if you send a card or flowers, then it's like, do I think that he's not here anymore because I'm using all the closure rituals? And so what does that say about that? You see what I mean? So ambiguous loss is that not just that your partner left you, but you had a great night last night, you come downstairs and they're gone with no explanation. And if anybody has ever stopped talking to you or left you without explanation, you know you carry that for a long time because you don't know what you did and you live in fear of doing it again. And so our kids have ambiguous loss. It's a loss without closure. It's like they're removed from their families. They don't know, am I going to go back? When will I go back? How many placements do I have to have before I go back? Is my family mad at me? Because I'm the one who told the teacher, right? Will they even recognize me because I'm 2 years older and like Noah, it's 6 inches bigger in 2 years, right? All those ambiguous losses, there's no closure. It's not like I was with my family, now I'm permanently not, and I can move on. It's open loss. So now we have this idea of ambiguous loss. It differs from ordinary loss because it freezes the grieving process wide open, right? And it prevents closure because things cannot return to the way they were. And you don't know when or if they will. So now we've had kids who have experienced the worst and second worst thing over and over and over in many cases. It's disenfranchised, so people don't even really see them as grieving. They don't recognize those behaviors as normal. They're blamed and shamed and stigmatized and diagnosed for the normal natural responses, and the loss is frozen open. It's ambiguous loss, so they don't know when it's going to end or how bad it's going to get. On top of it, there's secondary loss. And secondary loss are the natural consequences to the primary loss. So they're the things that happen as a result of the primary loss. So it means that not only am I losing this placement, but all the things that go with it, right? All those secondary losses. So I want you to just take a few, like a minute or two with your table mates and think, every time a child is moved, what are the other losses that go along with that? Okay, go ahead. Okay, let's come back together. So what are some of those losses? What are some of the losses? A loss of education, maybe a favorite teacher, or progress towards actually learning. What else? Pets. Extracurriculars. Friends. Siblings.
Smells.
Who said smells? Smells. Right, so ritual and routine as well as sensory like that, what it does is allows us to really relax, right? You come into your house and it smells right. It's like your brain just says like, oh, it's safe here, you know? It's the opposite. If you stay in hotels or something, your brain isn't used to all the sensory information, so every time the air conditioner clicks on, you're like, somebody's trying to kill me or break in the room. And so, it's this idea that says you can relax here, you can think and rest and that. So it's incredibly important, that sensory experience. What else? Culture. Your things, just your stuff.
Therapist.
A relationship with a therapist. Your favorite meal. Your church connections.
The sense of routine that you have to get used to. that
Yeah.
you gotta do that.
Routine, and routines create safety, right? And just the idea of familiarity and routine, like I know the food in the fridge is gonna be stuff I like or safe. I know the way things are supposed to go here. It's like first we do this, then we do that. That creates safety. How many of you are the oldest or only? Yeah, can you even imagine like somebody showing up in your house and be like, yeah, no, I'm older now, actually, so you're the little sister? Right? How many of you are the funny one in your family? Come on, I'm not gonna make you tell jokes, raise your hand. Right? How many of you are the smart one? The handsome one or the pretty ones? Right? So not the humble one then, not the humble one. Right, so this idea of like, what if somebody came in and suddenly your parents were laughing at their jokes and not yours? Or they're like, oh my gosh, she's so smart. She's so smart. Did you see how she did this? She's so smart. right? What that would do for you. That's a secondary loss. It's like the assumption of your role, right? And just as an aside, that idea of you're the smart one, you're the pretty one, you're the funny one, that emphasizes what I'm talking about the social context that we live in. How do you know you're smart? How do you know you're funny? People laugh at your jokes. They say you're so smart, you get good grades. Like, we exist in community. We exist as a tribal people. It's how we gain our identity, it's how we gain our safety. So those are some secondary losses, and those are only a few, right? We could go on and on forever. We could say some of the other losses of taking the bus home on the way from school and actually knowing where I'm at. That if I got left out right here, I'd know how to get home. Or maybe they're losses like my parents bought me a bike and said it was for me, and then when I had to move out, they said I had to leave it for the other kids, so I guess they didn't really love me like they said they did, right? Or the things that you packed up and took, you forgot the rock. It's not just a rock. It's the last thing my sister ever gave me, and now I'll never have it again because they threw it away, right? Those are secondary losses. So what we have now is the worst or second worst thing that could happen to you is happening over and over and over. In addition, people don't understand what's happening to you. They don't understand that it's a loss or that your behaviors are grief behaviors. In addition, the loss is ambiguous, so you don't know when it's going to end or how bad it's going to get. Instead, you're getting blamed, shamed, and stigmatized and labeled and diagnosed and often medicated to numb the normal, natural responses for what has happened to you. And on top of it, you have secondary losses, which just keep coming. And you're a kid, and you're untethered, and you have nobody who is making sure that you're okay through all of it. Nobody who you can go to who will stop it from happening, who will stand in way, who will stand in front and say, not now, you have to come through me, right? They are untethered and managing this on their own. So now I want you to draw a line that represents your life. So I'm 52, so you can write 0 to your age or the year you were born to this year, one or the other. Just draw one line. You're not going to have to turn it in, but I actually want you to do it. So if you are feeling oppositional or defiant, I know great meds for that. You can come see me. But I would love you to actually take out a pen. There's tables up here for those of you in the back. If you need it, if you need a pen, raise your hand. Some of your neighbors will help you out. But I would love you to actually draw a line. Yeah? We're all good? You got your life in front of you? Life flashing before you? Now what I'd like you to do is to write down your most significant losses, right? And only you know what those are. Only you know your losses. So what are they? Are they you had a house fire when you were little, or you lost a job, or your parents got divorced, or your dog died? What are your most significant life losses? And write them on your timeline. Go ahead and go. I'll give you a couple minutes. You will need this for the next activity, and everybody will know if you didn't do it. So you want to go ahead and write those down. Give you another minute. Raise your hand if you need more time. Okay, another quick minute. Okay, the next part of this is a two-step process that is complicated, especially with this many people, especially in this room setup. So I implore your attention to this next piece. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is to find a partner who you do not know well or at all, which means you're probably not sitting with them because you sit with your people. So in 1 second, I want you to grab a partner and come up to the front of the room with your partner. You can go around the sides of the walls or the front, but everybody get a partner, bring your line with you. Everybody needs a partner. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner, we'll hook you up. Isolation is fatal. Raise your hand if you need a partner. Isolation is fatal. Anybody need a partner? We need somebody over here. You? Over here? Did you need a partner? You need, somebody needs a partner over here. Who else does not have a partner? Right here. Anybody else need a partner? Raise your hand if you need a partner. And one more. Anybody else need a partner? Let me be really clear. Twos, not threes. Twos. Twos, twos, twos. Anybody need a partner? I can be your partner. Okay. Oh, there you go. We got somebody. Okay, awesome. Okay, now for the next set of instructions. Okay? Everybody with me? Great. Now that you have a partner who you do not know well or at all, what we're going to do, and you can use the front lobby area or go outside if you want to, and we'll do this and then we'll take a break, is you're going to tell them about your most significant losses and why they are so painful to you. Why, when I ask you with 90 seconds, you can come up with them like this. They're still top of mind. And then what the instructions say on the PowerPoint is we will switch 5 times, but clearly in a group like this, we won't do 5. We're just going to do 2. So maybe 2 minutes each, and then I will say switch. Then you will find someone else who you don't know well or at all. You will tell them about your most painful loss and why it's still so painful to you. And then we're going to reconvene in here at 2:30. And when we reconvene, I have a mic. Janae, did you give that back? Yes, up there. We'll pass it around. And I may just ask a couple of you to state out loud for the group your most painful loss and why it's still so painful. We'll look for these patterns that happen and try to understand what loss looks like that for humans. Are there any questions? Does everybody understand? So you'll be in your first partner till 25 after, your second till 2:30, and then you come back in here, and I'll just pass around the mic to specific people, maybe 3 or 4 of you, and then we'll take a break. Anybody have any questions about this? Yes, ma'am. Pick your most painful loss. Yes. Any other questions? Before we do this, any questions?
What if we refuse?
Who said it? Okay, right here. Thank you. What if we refuse? What if we refuse? So you don't feel comfortable telling multiple strangers your most profound losses and then having to do it in public? No? No. I guess I am just a little bit confused by that, right? Because let me just double check here. Isn't this what we do to our kids all the time? Don't they have to tell this therapist, and this one quits, and this goes on maternity leave, then this one after they move, and they have to tell another one, and then they have to do it the case plan, and then in front of the judge, and then everybody at school knows about their most painful things. Don't we do that to the kids? You're telling me you don't want to do what we do to the kids? No? It doesn't seem therapeutic to you. It doesn't seem like it would help you heal to do that. No? No. Well, you seem awfully oppositional, ma'am. So what do we do with kids who refuse? What do we call them and what do we do? They're non-compliant. What else?
Call
ODD, oppositional defiant. What else? Naughty. What else?
Resistant to treatment.
You're resistive to treatment. Thank you. What else?
In denial.
They're in denial. Over here. We punish them. Yeah, so what do we do if they're resistive to treatment, if they refuse? What is the treatment for not going to treatment? What is the response? More treatment. That's right. You don't go once a week, now you got to go 2 because you clearly need it. What else? More restriction or more restrictive treatment or placement. What else?
More medication.
We drop a level. We use punishment. Back there?
Medication.
We might medicate it out of you. We'll medicate you into compliance. That's right.
Take you further away from your
We might move you further away from more restrictive treatment, right? So blame, shame, punish, and disconnect. That's our treatment, right? So, we often talk about our kids as not having good boundaries. So I'm thinking you have a solid boundary response, right? It's not really defiance. It's like, excuse me, that violates my boundaries. So we regularly say that our kids don't have good boundaries, but we ask them to be violated constantly. And so, personally, I don't find it really therapeutic or healing to do this, which is why I'm not going to make you do it. But I want you to remember the feeling of panic that you have. The one where you're like, I guess I should just talk about the cat then, because I am not talking about that other thing. And I want you to feel how badly you wanted to run out of the room or fight back. I want you to feel the feeling of no thank you. And I want you to remember that feeling when you are regularly going about your daily business, asking kids to do things that not only would you not do yourselves, but if your child had something terrible happen and I brought them in here and gave them a mic, you would take me out, making sure that your kid didn't tell that story too. So your protective instincts are intact for yourself. They're intact for your children. Get them back intact for these children. And I want you to question the things you do as a matter of daily practice, the things we've always done, and ask yourselves, does it make sense in light of what we know?
Dr. Miller, do we not need to create the safe space for, suppose I have a child who is on a team, opens up to his coach, and of course the coach isn't a quote-unquote formal therapist, but I need to honor that space that he can have. He may need more time to talk to his coach.
So
rather than the
spontaneously forming.
How do we create that? Because I won't be able to probably get a judge's order to say give him more time.
Why not? Have you ever tried to do that?
You know I have.
Okay. So here's what I'm saying is that kind of spontaneous connection that I decide who I share with, who I develop trust with, that is therapeutic. If I tell you my story, if I gift you with my story, you have earned my trust. That's a thing. That's a very different thing than what we are talking about here. That's a very different thing. And so this is a great example, right? So ask the judge for more. Explain the context of connection. Explain how that all works, right? We have got to get used to standing up and basically we're all on the walking, the walking escalator and we're doing this and you just went like this, right? And we all need to get better at turning around saying, what are we doing over here? Can't we do this a different way? Can I ask the judge, how about we don't do that? Because I wouldn't want that to happen for my own kids, and we do what love would do.
Then one last thing, the competing interest will be the parent. Because what if the confidant for the child is the ex-husband or the ex-wife that the parent will never bury the hatchet for? Or it's somebody else on the other side, the in-law side, that the parent, mom or dad, just don't see eye to eye to.
Yeah.
And they don't want them having that extra time
So there's
to hear about the stuff that maybe the parent didn't even share with them.
There's going to be all kinds of things that complicate, all kinds of things. And what we have a responsibility to do as healers in a system that was not set up for healing, right? What we have a responsibility to do is to think about what would be healing for that child, for our children, for us, and to try to advocate for that with all of its complexities, to advocate, even if you feel like we've never done or they would never, yes, it's time to start raising your hand and say, excuse me, how about a new way? 15 minutes back here, 20 till, see you then. wasn't enough fun, we're gonna move on to trauma. I know. Let's do it. Good. All right, so as we're thinking about trauma, yep, I'm good, thank you. We often think about trauma in terms of thinking about what we know from a kid's case file or what's happened to them since they've come into our knowledge base or since they were born. But really, trauma is a much more global, and we want to kind of talk about that now. The impacts are much more global, right? So trauma can happen before you can talk or before you're born, so prenatally or pre-verbally. It may be known to you or unknown, remembered or unremembered, intergenerational, historical, and cultural. So we're really looking at a much broader lens than just the abuse a child experienced in the home when we came into the case. So a lot of you said you know ACEs study, and I'm just going to go over it super briefly because of that. But essentially, the ACEs study was done by Dr. Folletti and Kaiser Permanente in the mid-1990s with 17,000 people in a suburb of San Diego. And basically what they were testing was, I'm wondering if what happens to you when you're small impacts your health outcomes later in life. And what they found was yes, actually. A very, very substantial yes. And this information is continuing to come to us a little like drinking from a fire hose. So we're continuing to learn more and more things about ACEs. And are finding ACEs to be a better predictor of things like a better predictor of heart attack than even diabetes is. And so we're finding that lifelong health outcomes are most reliably predicted by what happened to you when you were small. So what they found in the study was that 2/3 of US adults had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, so abuse, neglect, or household trauma, right? 2/3 of US adults experienced at least one. And of those that experienced one, 87% experienced two or more, which means they don't come alone usually. You're not just like abused. You usually have domestic violence and sexual abuse and physical abuse. So they come in groupings. And the thing that's relevant to know about this study is that it was done not only in a suburb of San Diego, but on college-educated white folks with good health insurance. So we might say a fairly privileged sample, and still 2/3 of folks experience at least one adverse childhood experience. What we know from the field is if you're working in this field, the estimates are more like 70 to 90% of people who work in child welfare have at least one ACE score, adverse childhood experiences score. And the ACEs test is a test that has 10 questions on it that are not really all-encompassing, but were just decided on and have been replicated in many, many places. And basically what they measure is, did you feel safe, lovable, and as though you could trust others to meet your needs? Those are really the questions that they measure. And some things that happen aren't on there. So, for example, I grew up in a very tough neighborhood, and we had a lot of gang violence. I saw a lot of violent things happen, heard gunshots on a regular basis, homes were broken into. My father was a victim of abuse and neglect by his father. Like, those things aren't even measured on the ACEs score. So I might come up with a very low ACEs score, even though it was a pretty tumultuous environment. And so some of that is changing to pick a little bit of that up. But basically, this is what we're talking about. And if you don't know much about this, I highly recommend that you go to ACES Too High, TOO, ACES Too High, HIGH.com, and take the test. If you've taken it once, it's pretty much it. You're never going to be over or under 18 again. Sorry to tell you that. It happened to you 0 to 18, or it didn't, unless you remember something. And your score is your score. And once you get to 4 or more, we begin to worry about the predictive, cumulative health impacts. So basically, this is how ACEs work. And this is new. This historical trauma and intergenerational adversity was added by ACE Interface more recently in the last year, which is in recognition to the growing amount of understanding we have about intergenerational and historical trauma on your present day and future predictive health. So we're just learning more about that, and they added that foundation. And so to illustrate how ACEs work, I'll just tell you the story of my family. So let's see, intergenerational and historical trauma. So I'm clearly white and grew up in a family that was white, but there was a fair amount of historical and intergenerational trauma, not only because of challenging immigrant stories, but because I share the DNA of harm that goes through my family in the form of abuse and neglect. So my grandfather was an alcoholic, and he perpetrated untold abuse to my father, right? And so that lineage, that history is in my family's DNA. So my grandfather, I assume, did the things he did to my father because it happened to him. And so we start with a history of intergenerational adversity and trauma. Then my dad was abused and neglected by his dad, who took him to work at the bar every day and let anybody do anything while he worked. This changed his social, emotional, and cognitive functioning. He began to see the world is not safe. I am not lovable. I cannot trust others to meet my needs. And it changed the way he felt about himself, his own lovability and worthiness, and his own way he showed up in the world. As a result, it changed his behavior, and he adopted more health risky behaviors. So because of that profound pain, because of that profound loss, he started smoking and smoked for 30 years, many, like several packs a day to ease the anxiety and the pain. He used food to ease the anxiety and the pain, and engaged in behaviors that made it more likely he would develop disease. In fact, he did. He was a type 2 diabetic, he had a stroke, he had a heart attack, he had high blood pressure, and he died at 72 after a quadruple bypass, which is the top one, which is early death, up to 20 years early death at 4 or more ACEs is what we know. So it's not just a pyramid, it's actually people's lives. And it shows up because when things happen to you when you are young, when things happen that do not make you feel safe and lovable, and when there is not that protective support, it changes the way your brain works and the way you behave, and it shows up in adverse health outcomes throughout your life that are incredibly predictive of lifelong health or harm depending on what happens to you. And what we know is that ACEs can predict most serious medical challenges. It can predict your likelihood for alcoholism and alcohol abuse, COPD, depression, fetal death, health-related quality of life, illicit drug use, heart disease, lung disease, liver disease. It can predict when you start to have sex. It can predict when you start to smoke. It can predict the number of STDs you have. It can predict unintended pregnancies. It can predict obesity, diabetes, and many more things. So it's not just those people need to make better choices, right? It's not just they should have decided to do it differently. There are many, many things impacting people's ability to do it differently and the predictive lifelong harm of those childhood experiences. This is brand new. Actually, it's the first time I've ever used it in a training. You're a special group. ACE Interface just released this, and they're talking about the 3 kinds of ACEs. So up until now, we have talked only about the individual ACEs, the 10 questions that are about you. They added a second one not too long ago, which is community ACEs. So this is substandard schools, historical trauma, the cultural racism, violence, poverty, poor water and air quality, lack of social capital and mobility, substandard wages, lack of jobs, poor housing quality and affordability. So these, some of the community things that show up might show up here, right? So as I talked about my story in the beginning, some of those might show up here. And now they've added a third, and it's climate ACEs. It's environmental ACEs. And what it is the stress and anxiety and trauma response that comes from climate crisis. So record heat and drought, wildfires and smoke, record storms, flooding and mudslides, sea level rises, tornadoes, hurricanes, volcano eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes. Basically, we used to go to nature to regulate, right? When things fell out of control, you went for a walk in nature and things acted like they should. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. It's cold in the winter, it's warm in the summer. We have predictable weather patterns. We have averages and, for this time of year. And a lot of those are just being blown out of the water, right? Entire islands are disappearing and some are reappearing as the glaciers melt. They just discovered 7 new islands. And so everything is kind of up in the air as we're figuring out what's happening to our changing world. So these are the things that happen that are unpredictable that I don't have protection from, right? They can happen in my home, they can happen in my community, and they can happen to the earth or in the environment or outside. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about related to ACEs and the way it impacts a child's ability to feel safe in the world. One of the adverse childhood experiences, one of the 10 individuals is, was a biological parent ever lost to you through divorce, abandonment, or another reason? And so actually, when we remove children, we create an ACE, which is one of the most well-researched ways that we know that we can implement lifelong predictive harm. And when we do removals, we actually add an ACE in that removal. So it becomes incredibly important to treat this like a nuclear option because we know about the lifelong predictive harm that we set in motion the moment we do that. And when these kind of traumas occur to us, our brains respond, our brains and our bodies, by helping keep us safe. What happens is we get flooded with cortisol and adrenaline and other stress-responding hormones. And what happens is, as we're flooded with those, they say to the body, a threat is present. You've got 3 choices. Fight the lion, stand really still behind the tree so the lion doesn't see you, right? Or run from the lion. Those are your choices. And what happens is our bodies get flooded with these chemicals, but if we don't have the ability, like children often don't, to run away from their harm, to fight the harm, right? They just freeze and take it all in. If you don't act on those chemicals, they get stored in your body. And they wear you out from the inside out, and they end up showing up later as health responses and health challenges, because trauma is not just stored in the brain, it's stored in the body. It's a full body experience. This is also a relatively new, I want to add another one. Has anyone heard of the 4th one being added here?
Appease.
Sorry?
Appease?
Not appease. It's an F word.
Flock.
Yes. So Bruce Perry's starting to talk about flocking. Fight, flight, freeze, and flock. And so flocking is we come together with other humans for protection. So we say, we're all concerned about this as you're going to talk to your boss, right? You find safety in numbers, right? So we're all worried about it. I'm just speaking up, but it's really all of them, So that's a flocking response, is coming together for safety. And so this idea of fight, flight, freeze, and flock is how we respond to those ACEs and stressors. And this gets stored in our whole body, which is why just talking about trauma is an inadequate response to healing trauma, because it's not only in our brains, and it's not only in our thinking part of our brain, it's in our animalistic fighting part of our brain, freezing and fight, flight, flighting. And so people who have complex trauma, right, they get this stress response and they get stuck in the on position. So that, remember back to the cute swimsuit, the daisy swimsuit? That's what I mean, is they get stuck at 45 or 50, like the runway to regulate is gone. So if you don't have that stress response elevated from too many times and too many years of stress, if it's at 0, then you can say, ooh, I'm so mad at him. I don't really want to raise these kids alone. And you can bring it down before it's, ooh, I'm so mad at him, and blah, right? So you just kind of lose your ability to regulate and keep that in check. And what happens is that things in nature get flooded with these stress responses so that they can fight, flight, or freeze. But then when the threat is over and gone, they come back down. But with trauma, especially when you can't act on it, you're flooded with it and you stay on, right? You stay on, especially without a protector, especially untethered. You have to stay in the position where you're ready to fight, flight, freeze, because nobody brings you to the point of safety where you can bring your runway back down. So I would be remiss in talking about trauma if I didn't talk about the historical, intergenerational, and carried trauma. I often say I'm not really the best person to talk about this, and this is a whole coursework that I hope that you're learning more about and pursuing more on, but I am going to just say enough to get this in your brains right now. In the context of trauma, what we're talking about for historical and intergenerational trauma is trauma that happens across generations. So entire communities have been traumatized. So in Minnesota, we have lots of folks from the Hmong population who had to flee their homeland in mass, right? Or Indian boarding schools, or slavery, or other things that have happened to whole groups of people. That kind of intergenerational, passed from one to the next, but this is cultural trauma and historical trauma, which is whole groups of folks, and that gets passed forward, as do the native ways of healing and the resilience, right? But the trauma still continues to impact as well. So what we're talking about is this cumulative emotional and psychological wounding that happens across generations in addition to what happened in your own lifetime. So it just exacerbates it. It's the starting point is not equal. It is at a higher starting point and added on to there. And what we're learning about this kind of trauma is that we pass this kind of trauma on through our environment and our DNA. So in effect, trauma is contagious, right? We're learning so much about how we pass this forward. And the current research on it is that we pass it forward 7 generations. 7 generations, which is indigenous wisdom, it's biblically based, and it's things that we're starting to now see in the research. So for example, there was a study done of 2 neighboring communities in Europe where they had a huge gluttonous harvest. One community ate themselves sick, one stored it, and 7 generations later, the health outcomes for the gluttonous community were far worse than those of the community that stored it. And so what you are eating now, what you are doing for your health now, is what we're learning going to impact your generations forward up to 7 generations. And yours is the result of 7 generations back, you know? And so we're starting to see the emergence of a lot of allergies and responses that were environmental exposures generations back in farming communities. There's also prenatal and intergenerational trauma in this way. So this kind of prenatal trauma, they did a study in 9/11 that women who were pregnant 9/11 who gave birth, they swabbed their kids and they had heightened levels of cortisol. So basically, we know that cortisol crosses the uterine barrier. We know that when moms are under stress when they're pregnant, it passes to the unborn child, and the child comes ready for fight, flight, freeze, activated already because of what happened. So it doesn't have to be just since you were born. And there's emergent studies on this idea around oops babies or unwanted pregnancies and the chemical messaging of welcomed about lovability and those kinds of experiences throughout the lifetime. And then the last one's one you might not have heard of, which is carried trauma. Carried trauma is this idea that you carry somebody else's rage, guilt, shame, anger on their behalf. So for example, in my situation, I talked about my dad had these experiences, but he kept us safe, right? He kept us safe, but I was raised in a house where all of his rage and shame was present, right? And so I picked up some of this and basically carried it on his behalf. And so if you are living a pretty goddamn great life, but you're anxious and you don't know why, or you're sad and you don't know why, or you feel shame and you don't know why, this is the kind of work I would recommend. Pia Melody's book is Facing Codependence. It's relational, not alcoholic or drug-related codependence. And that's a good read on that, I'm sure, for a friend. I'm sure it's not you, but for your good friend, you might want to write that down. And the kind of therapy related to that is post-induction therapy, which is basically a reparenting therapy to heal early childhood trauma, incredibly impactful for adults. So that is our grief, loss, and trauma, and I'm going to make a transition to the new way of work. But I first want to take a pause and see if anyone has any thoughts or questions about this so far. Yes?
As a society, why do you think we have the need to decompartmentalize trauma and natural human responses by trying to measure and label it?
To
I don't
decompartmentalize?
want to say that word. Like, yes.
Yeah, compartmentalize
Yeah.
it. By labeling it or what?
By trying to measure it or our need to label it.
Yeah. So I think humans try to label and measure to make sense of things so that we share common language about it, and we can share then, if we know what it is, then, and we develop healing responses and we have a common language about it, it's an ease of organization and passing on, what we know. So I think it's a human response. We labeled all the flowers and all the trees for the same reason, so that when we say that one tree, we know what we're talking about. So I think that there's that. I think the piece, and I'm not sure what's underlying your question, and I really like your question under your question to be stated, which is, but the piece that I wonder if you're talking about is the idea of, the stigmatizing piece of it, the labeling and stigmatizing piece of it. And what I'll say is that here's the great thing for me. I mean, there's a lot of flaws in ACEs and there's a lot of flaws in trying to label, but the great thing about it is what it elevated was, it's not those people, friends. It's us, right? We used to have the clipboard and they had the problem. And now it's like, oh yeah, in fact, we're all human. In fact, ACEs are pervasive. In fact, there is really not like a normal family, In fact, everybody is struggling in some kind of way. I only know one person who ever told me they were raised in the perfect family, and she was one of the sickest people I've ever met. Like, seriously, I had to let her go. For real, I'm not kidding. How can you be raised in the perfect family? I'm just checking, but everybody in here was raised by humans, right? Yeah. Well, humans are by nature imperfect, and so we're all doing our best. You're all degreed up and experienced up, and your kids are going to need a therapy fund right next to their college fund. So, so I think that what I'll say is that to label for the point of insurance billing or stigmatizing, not a super fan, right? But the idea that there are benefits to us understanding what we're dealing with here so that we can, A, find ways to help heal, but B, more importantly, as we measure it, we realize it's not an isolated thing because, the real truth of it is, I think we have a propensity without doing some of that measurement to blame it on those people. It's black and brown people's trouble, or it's poor people's trouble, and we've done that for years and years until we measured it with the college-educated white folks with good health insurance, and we're like, oh shoot, it's everybody's trouble, right? And so there are benefits to doing that as well, and it just has to be taken with caution. That was a highly complex answer. Is that what you meant to ask?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
It's also an opportunity for connection, though.
Say more about that. An opportunity for connection.
If we understand our histories and maybe what's driving us, and we connect to find people who they've shared some of those.
Yeah.
things,
So she's saying it's an opportunity to connect, because if you understand your history, you can find people with similar histories and find healing in that connection. Yeah. I love connection. One more. Anybody else? Is there anybody who's sitting here thinking, this is just a flat out load of crap? Anybody? I'd be happy to entertain that question too. Or like, it's nice, but it's not real life. Well, I'll tell you what, my email and my phone number are going to be on the last slide. So if you're thinking that and you want to just have a little moment with me, I love those moments. Or I'll wait up here afterwards too. Okay? All right. So now we're going to move on to this idea of shifting. So we've we've laid out clearly, some of what we're dealing with, why it's important for us to look at this differently. And so really what I'm about is moving to the next place, beyond being trauma-informed, but really stopping the trauma that we cause, and starting to think of families not as the problem, but instead as the solution, right? Families is the foundation of lifelong well-being. We all know what happens in our family sets the trajectory, right? So many of you right now are in therapy trying to work this business out of what happened or didn't happen, what you get or didn't get in your family situation. But those relationships, those connections are the foundation of lifelong well-being when they go well. So we're starting to look at some of these problems a little differently. And we can look at them in a couple of lenses. So when I'm in child welfare systems, which we're in child welfare systems all over the country, and I ask people sort of like, what's the biggest problem you're facing? Very often the answer I get is that we don't have enough resource families, right? We don't have enough people who are willing to take care of these kids. And that would be treating the problem as though it's a supply problem, right? We don't have enough supply of families. But I've been thinking about this, and our team at Alia has been thinking about this as a demand problem. Maybe we have more than enough resource families. Maybe what we have too much of is children who can't live safely at home. And depending on the problem you are trying to solve, you approach that quite differently, right? So do I spend my time and energy and money going to recruit more strangers to take care of these kids? Or do I spend my time, energy, and money helping parents to safely parent, right? And those solutions are quite different. And so thinking about supply and demand. Here's another example. John Choi, who's a Ramsey County attorney, when he first came to St. Paul, decided to take on human trafficking as a demand problem. So historically, human trafficking has been treated as a supply problem, which means that they go around and arrest all of the women and men who were working in the human trafficking area, arrest them and put them in jail, right? That's removing the supply. But he decided to start looking at it as a demand problem and instead send out undercover cops to take pictures of license plates of cars that were found in areas commonly known for trafficking and mailed pictures of those license plates, date and timestamp, to the female heads of household related to those vehicles. So that is curbing the demand. Your car was seen at 2:46 a.m. in an alley known for human trafficking. Do you know where your husband is? Right? That's what he decided to do. And I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying. It's a mindset shift. It's a very different way of looking at the problem, right? Do we arrest all these folks, or do we say, why the heck is there a demand? Let's stop the demand side, right? So thinking about problems differently is something we like to be doing here. And so one of the ways we're doing that is really fundamentally rethinking our purpose in juvenile justice and child welfare, fundamentally rethinking how do we keep children safely with their families, not from their families? How do we keep children safely with their families, not from their families? It's a very different approach to our work. If we're focusing not on abuse and neglect has happened, we go in, remove children to keep them safe, right? That's a very different approach to say, how do we make it work to keep them safely with their families? So back to this little piece of history is, we were founded on the assumptions that children were property. So you could do whatever you wanted as long as you didn't cause a fuss or didn't harm them and people found out about it. So they belonged to you. Actually, the Humane Society was created to take care of animals, not humans. Right? Animals were more important than kids when we first started. And then we started saying, kids are getting hurt. That's not great. We should really make sure they're in safe places. And so we started thinking about where children went and started looking at our work around place. That's where we started putting children up on the platform, the train platform. We put them up for adoption. And the adoption train came through, and you'd pick your kids to go work on the farm, and then they were in a safe place, right? That's what happened next. And then it became clear that kids were still being abused and neglected in those situations, and so we became about the individual child and became about rescuing and saving children from bad people and putting them with better people, from bad parents and putting them with better parents. But it was really around rescuing and saving the child after they had already been abused or neglected. Then we would come in and rescue and create a better situation. And the place that we're moving now is really understanding that children don't exist in isolation, that children are part of families and communities and tribes, that they are not single entities, that in fact, you know you're funny because people laugh, that kids don't know that they are separate from the adults in their life until further on in their development, that we people, we humans, are made for connection, and that is where we thrive. And so the idea of taking a child out, treating the child, but ignoring the family and community, and creating a new family or community is not producing the desired results. And in fact, the family and community also are in need of the healing that we're now just giving to a child in isolation. And children in isolation are not faring as well as those who are connected. And so when you know better, you have to do better. So this is the place where we're coming into. The place we're coming into is thinking about our work more holistically, not children as individuals, but families and communities in the context of their culture, in the context of their tribe, in the context of their community and their family. And very frankly, we have explored all areas and we have no evidence to continue the work the way we've been doing it. There is no evidence to continue the work the way we've been doing it. We don't have evidence that it's financially sustainable. We can't find enough people to do this work. We don't have evidence that the return on investment is reasonable. We don't have evidence that our interventions actually heal and make it better. We don't have evidence from the research. We don't have evidence from the outcomes. We don't have evidence from the voices of youth or families. We have no evidence to continue on our current path. And if you have evidence, I would love to see it, because we're building a body of evidence that says, even if we wanted to keep doing what we're doing, we can't. We performed a social return on investment study that said for every dollar we invested in foster care when we did it well or out of home care, we have a negative return on investment, so we lose $3.64 for every dollar we invest. And when we do it well, when we do it how, that's when we do it well. And when we do it how we typically do it, we lose $9.55 for every dollar we invest. This is on a $29.9 billion investment annually in this country. So we can't afford to keep doing what we're doing the way we're doing it. We sent this out in advance to some smart people, even though the analysis was done by somebody who does the analysis for the World Bank. We still sent it out and said anything that we missed. And a human behavioral economist from USC responded back and said, I don't get this, because this analysis said it would be better if you did nothing at all. Nothing at all. The outcome, the return on investment would be better. And we said, right, yeah, except we can't do nothing because children might be harmed or die if we did nothing. We have to do something, but we don't know what to do. And so we have to get busy building a different way of work, right? Really, this is the idea that we just know more than we've ever known. So here, friends, this is the thing. 3 decades ago, my mother had gallbladder surgery. She was in the hospital for almost 10 days. She had a scar that was 8 to 10 inches wide, right? If I needed gallbladder surgery today, I might stay overnight. They'd go in through my belly button and I wouldn't have hardly any scarring at all. Like, nobody's saying, your mom's doctor was a quack. What was wrong with him? Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying everything he did is wrong. But if my doctor performed that same surgery in that same way, you betcha they'd be talking about him, right? Basically what we're saying is, when you know better, you do better. And if we have interventions that we know cause less harm, cost less money, have a better chance of healing, why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we do that, right? And so there's no shame in it. It's just time for an adjustment. It's time for us to adjust our practices to align with the current research of doing it better. Some folks have been talking about this like an FDA recall. Like, you think the drug is going to help, you give it to people, you start noticing, it didn't help as much as we thought. Actually, it caused some harm. We better pull that off the market. And that's about where we are in our field. Because some remedies are worse than the disease, and that's the place where we are in our traditional ways of working with kids and families when there's been abuse and neglect. So this is my favorite innovator. This is in the email signature line on all of my emails, and this is Buckminster Fuller. And what he says, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. It makes the old model obsolete. So I am not a fighter. I don't want to blow anything up, right? That's far too violent for me. I don't want to blow up the system. That's not me. I'm a builder. I want to build a better way. I want to build a way that's so easy and makes so much sense and aligns with the research and does so much good that why wouldn't you do it, right? So here's an example of that. Anybody remember this? All righty. Okay, so I have spent many Friday nights in this kind of a place, right? Half my retirement savings in late fees. Lots of hours being kind, rewinding. Right? Family fights in public because we couldn't decide on a movie, and when we finally did, they were out of it. Thanks a lot, right? So you remember this, right? You remember how it went? Okay. And you know, your climate isn't that much different than mine, even though Janae wants to say it is. You guys get winter. And so you don't want to go outside on a Friday night either. You'd rather be in your pajamas at home. So what happened? What happened to all the blockbusters? Netflix. We were not out in front of Blockbusters with our signs, down with Blockbuster. I will not be kind. I will not rewind. We were not protesting Blockbusters. So one day, poof, they're gone. How come? How come, right? Because Redbox and Netflix said, you can stay home in your jammies, Amelia. There are no late fees. The kids can watch one downstairs and one upstairs. It's super easy and awesome. Let's do that, right? And so basically, what is the Netflix version of our work? What do we do that makes so much sense, that's so much more economical and so much easier, produces such good results? That's what we're trying to build. So friends, I don't have a tattoo, but if I got one, it'd be this. And the only reason I don't is because we learn more every day, and I'd be afraid I'd have to redo it. So, but I'm going to walk you through this, and it's one of the most important things I have to say to you today about why aren't we doing this another way, okay? So this is based off the work of Margaret Wheatley. She's got lots of books out there you could read, A Better Way, etc., but it's basically she's a community organizer. And she talks about the development and evolution of a system. And so all systems are living people, right? They grow, evolve, and change just like we do. So this can apply to the juvenile justice system, the education system, our healthcare system, our government, the child welfare system, all systems, okay? And what happens is, in the beginning, we have a set of assumptions upon which we build the system. So we had a problem we were trying to solve, and we had assumptions about that problem, and we built a response to it. And then there's the birth of a system. Once the system matures, it's everybody's job to subconsciously protect the status quo. So once the system fully develops, now all of the insurance reimburses that, all of the roles do that, all of the money goes this way, right? Everything is, all the partners deliver this, all the contracts are written this way. It's, the status quo is to be maintained, right? But it becomes really clear that as we have more information, we learn more, that the status quo is not doing the desired results, not producing them. And so the system begins to fail, and it needs to be intentionally put into hospice because it's dying. How do we know the system is dying? We can't recruit enough strangers to take care of these kids. We don't have enough money to take care of these kids. People don't want to do this work. The millennial workforce is like, and you want me to do what? No, thank you, right? Because 40% of our workforce is burned out, clinically diagnosable with secondary traumatic stress, because we turn people over, on average in this country, 40% a year. I work with a system that hires 100 people a month, and by the end of the month, 85 of them are gone. We can't keep doing it the way we've been doing it. It's not sustainable. And people know it, and you know it. And so what happens is innovators, trailblazers, and pioneers begin to pop up, and they're like, this is not working. I got a model for that, I got a model for that. And we're trying to piece it together, and our workforce has initiative fatigue because you're all certified in, been to the training, trying to figure out, how do I do structured decision-making in safety organized practice? I don't know how to do that. And so basically what Margaret Wheatley says is until all those people connect up together and build a new way of work, things don't change. But if we can connect together, resource it, and build the new way, then we transition over to this way and it starts all over again. It'll do the same thing because we'll learn more again. Right? We'll learn more again. But here's some of the things that we've learned. These beginning assumptions, they are filled with implicit, explicit, and systemic racism. They are built on the assumptions that if we took our children from black and brown and native families and put them with whiter families, they'd fare better. They are filled with assumptions that if we took our children from poor families and put them with wealthier families, they'd fare better. And we know it's not true. We know that children need their families, their culture, and their community to thrive. And now that we know that, we can't pretend that we don't know it anymore, and we have to do it differently. And so our job is to get busy building a new way of work together. That's our job. And the good news is, we're up for it, because we know more than we've ever known about what kids and families need to thrive. We know more than we've ever known, ever, from the outcomes, from the research, from the practice. We know more than we've ever known about how to get this right. And lucky us, friends, lucky us. We're the generation that gets to build this. We get to decide the new way. We get to build the new way. We're going to go down in the record books of the ones who fixed some of these broken assumptions, the ones who made it right in communities and families of color, the ones who did the healing so people didn't have to suffer their whole lives from untreated trauma. Yeah, we're going to do that together. And it's going to be amazing. And it's a lot closer than you think. I promise you, you can come looking for me. We are 5 years away from people going, you used to do what with kids and families? People coming out of social work school in 5 years are going to look at you and you're going to tell stories and they're going to say, that's crazy. You can't look backwards for the pace of change. Look forwards. Look what has happened in this country in the last 2 years. Look at the social movements. Things are going at rapid speed. And so it's time to show up. It's time to show up and do this differently. So we didn't know how to build this, right? We got to build this thing. We didn't think we could go to the back room and do that alone. So we invited a bunch of people. We invited 100 innovators from around the country. 10 innovators from tribes and the federal government, 10 from state government, 10 from county government, 10 innovation fellows like Ashoka, MacArthur, and Bush. 10 people that didn't know anything about child welfare, so they could go, you do what? Say it again. 10 people with lived experience, but it turned out they're also running systems. And so a third of folks had lived experience, either lost kids to the system or grew up in the system, right? 10 people who were from nonprofits, 10 child specialists like psychiatrists and the American Academy of Pediatrics sent people. You get the idea, right? 100 people in 10 tables of 10 with one of each kind at each table. And we asked them, how might we redesign a better child welfare system? And for 4 days, they worked with IDEO. Do you know IDEO? IDEO is a human-centered design firm out of Stanford Design School. Their clients are Coca-Cola, Levi, Google, and Apple. They don't work in child welfare. That's a different training for a different day, how we came to work with them. But 4 days in Minneapolis, all these people flew themselves in. They designed for 4 days with each other. They answered the question, how might we redesign a better child welfare system? Your own Janae Harvey was one of the 100 designers, which is how I came to know her. And they said, you asked the wrong question, Amelia. And I said, that's so great, because it's the year of my life, and I raised $1 million to do it, so awesome. They said, you don't want to rebuild a new child welfare system, because the perfect child welfare system already exists when it works well. The perfect child welfare system is the family. You have asked the wrong question. Don't build a parallel bureaucracy. Figure out how to help families who struggle. Every child is born into the perfect supply chain. It's just that sometimes it doesn't work well. Sometimes it's not safe. Sometimes it's not functioning in the way we need it to. How do we fix that? How do we fix that? What do families need to be able to safely parent? And so we call this idea an unsystem. It's not the unsystem or a model. It's not a model at all. It's a mindset shift. It's a shift away from the idea of practices like blaming, shaming, punishing, and disconnecting that undermine family bonds. And it's a shift to practices that put the whole child at the center, the whole family, that involve consistent supportive connections that are culturally specific, locally delivered, that value rather than disconnect family ties, and that rely on natural community support. So how do we build family well-being? That's an unsystem, which means unravel, de-bureaucratizing it, get close to families and communities and learn what they need. They also gave us these guiding principles, which are ways that we will know if we're on track. These are things we will know. 1, protect relational connections as sacred. 2, nurture the capacity for joy, not just in children and families, but in ourselves. Friends, helping people should be joyful work. It should not diminish your ability to parent and partner. It shouldn't take away from your sleep and your health to help people, right? How do we do the work in joyful ways? How do we restore joy to family connections and family well-being again? Insisting on racial equity and radical inclusion, right? I addressed this briefly, but essentially our work is about anti-racism work. It is not about diversity and inclusion. It is about anti-racist practices that are woven into our history and our foundation. Daring to share power, which means not only with each other, because when change happens, people get all their marbles and want to sit in the corner. So helping your partner share, sharing with families, sharing with each other, but being open to courageous partnerships. Committing to intergenerational well-being, meaning we don't just remove a child and treat a child, we look up and down generational tracks. Trusting the wisdom of children and families to design their own futures. What a novel idea, right? And finally, when you don't know what to do, we have a saying that says, do what love would do. Do what you would do for someone you love. Because I promise you, you would figure it out. Figure it out. So we think we're at the end of where our thinking and talking and task forcing and work plan writing can take us. So we refer to ourselves as a do tank, not a think tank, right? And that means you have to have brave people who are willing to say, we'll try it, we'll figure it out, let's try it a new way. So after we came up with this with these 100 innovators, we asked systems to apply RFIs, requests for innovators, to say who's willing to try out these concepts in real life. And the Eastern Service Region of Iowa responded, yes, Lori Frick. And so we selected 5 systems. We have Cass County, North Dakota, Eau Claire County, Wisconsin, Eastern Service Region, Waupaca County, and Washington County, Maryland, which is Appalachia. And basically the leader, there's a leader and a second, and a lived experience guide who whispers, I don't know if that would work for me and mine, and a professional guide who has experience in the system who can say, these people are doing it, or you can do more faster. This cohort of the 2 leaders from each area, plus a lived experience guide and a professional guide, those 20, have come to Minneapolis last year every single month to begin doing the work differently, talking about it, learning from each other, and measuring it, and now every other month. This is a saying that I really love from Chuck from Waupaca, which says, what we're doing really is the electric light bulb did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. So we're done tweaking, we're done doing it a little better, we're talking about different. Henry Ford didn't say, if we could just breed faster horses, right? Inventing the automobile is very different than horses. And so a lot of our work right now in child welfare is about doing what we're doing a little better rather than doing it differently. So this is why we're thinking about problems in different kinds of ways. So really thinking about when you go back, sort of, what can I do? And I just invite you to add one question to your daily work, which is, what would it take? What would it take? So I am not asking you to ask, is it possible to keep this family safely together? because we have demonstrated it's possible in a lot of cases, almost all. Instead, start asking, what would it take for every child to be safely at home or safely within their own family? Or what would it take to help this family who's struggling? Because the truth is, we know a lot of this answer, and the question is, will we be willing to do what it will take? Are we willing to share in the risk of what it would take? Because right now, the risk is all theirs, right? We take action to ensure we have no risk or little risk, and the risk all falls on families and communities and children. And so how do we share the risk? Are we willing to do that? So what would it take to keep this family safely together? What would it take to help these parents safely parent? What would it take? Start asking the question. And ask it again and again and again. And an example of that is, we had a new mac and cheese restaurant move into my neighborhood. And I went in, my son's gluten-free. I said, do you carry gluten-free noodles? No, ma'am, I'm sorry, we don't. I said, okay, well, could you tell the manager that customers are asking, right? So we went down a few weeks later, and I said, we're going to a different restaurant, and I said to my husband, I'm gonna pop in and ask about the gluten-free noodles, just a minute. He's like, Amelia? I'm like, I know. So I'm like, hi, I'm wondering if you have gluten-free noodles. It's a different grouping, right? Different staff. And they're like, no, we don't. I said, could you let the manager know that customers are asking for them? Sure, yeah. Third time we go to the neighborhood. My husband's like, I know, just go. I'm like, hi, I would so love to patronize your cute little new restaurant, but our family eats gluten-free. Do you have any gluten-free noodles? Right? And I ask every time I go down, why do I do that? I know the answer. Why do I do it? That's the only way it's going to change.
They're not going to respond unless they feel that there's a demand
That's
for
right.
gluten-free noodles.
So now it's like a lot of people are asking, because I ask different staff every time. Right? And because they're never going to have it if I don't keep asking, you know? And then I walk in with my son like, I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry, you can't have mac and cheese tonight. I'm sorry, we're just going to have to go home and get you a dry sandwich. You know? So what I'm saying is, I keep asking even though I know the historic answer is no. Because if I keep asking, the chances of the answer being yes go up. Can you tell I'm a middle child, right? A lot of our team are middle children. All right, so this is how we move to this. This is how it changes. It's the fundamentally rethinking and asking, what would it take to keep these folks safely together? And we started to think about this because really, if you think about this for a second, what is the National Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention System? We don't have one. We don't have one. Are you kidding me? We don't have one. Because our public child welfare systems were set up as secondary prevention agencies. Once a child was abused and neglected, we go in to make sure it doesn't happen again and keep them safe. We do not have a primary prevention agency. So that's what we're doing in the cohort, is building a proof of concept that we can get involved earlier, that we can prevent abuse and neglect from happening, that we can get parents what they need to safely parent, so we don't have to get to the point of trying to ameliorate abuse and neglect, right? Here's another one. Whose job is it to support parents until they can safely parent their children? What role? I'll tell you. I go into agencies and I get this answer. It's me, I'm the parent educator. And I said, this is so great. Tell me more about it. Oh yeah, because they had just told me earlier that on a visit there was a mom doing meth in the bathroom. So I was like, oh, this is the problem, right? It's education. If she knew how to parent, if we got her to a parenting class, she wouldn't do meth in the bathroom on the visit. It's just a matter of knowing. Like, that's not good for your kids, right? That's the second class. So it's not knowing. No, that's not the case, right? So then we have a parent mentor, and I say, yes, 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 right? And they say, I say, how many cases do you have? 25. How long can you interact with families? 8 weeks. And I say, probably she's not going to be able to work through her meth addiction in 8 weeks, right? So here's the thing, we don't even have roles in our child welfare agencies, and I know you all have a really awesome parent partner program, and it's a start, right? Because what it really takes, what really heals, this is why I don't promote models, because this is the magic in every model. Ready? A human being shows up, A human being says, you're in pain, I'm gonna stand with you, I'm gonna keep coming until you open the door, I'm gonna knock, I'm gonna knock, I'm gonna knock. I'm gonna walk with you until you walk out the other side and you can and will feel better, and I'm not leaving until you do. That is the magic. That is of every intervention includes, every successful intervention includes the magic, persistent, nurturing connection of a human. That's what it takes. And that means until you feel better, not until 8 weeks, right? Until you feel better. So that's the movement, is how do we move people from our out-of-home care to the beginning of prevention, from secondary rescuing to primary prevention, from dealing only with the kids to helping parents safely parent. That's the movement. That's what we're doing.
Dr. Amelia, you're gonna have a problem. Federal guidelines, we're all on a timeline. We're all on a timeline. A child under 3, we can do permanency in 6 months. A child over 3, you got a year. That healing may not happen in that time frame.
So here's what I'll say. Do you have gluten-free noodles? That's what I'll say. So this is true. The federal guidelines are in place on an old way of work. So is the federal funding. So is the insurance funding. So are the services your partners provide. So is all of that, right? All of that's true. And if it was your nephew, I bet you'd figure it out.
Yep, you
I
would.
bet you would. So let's figure it out, right? Let's keep asking for the gluten-free noodles. Let's turn around on the moving walkway. Let's ask the judge for more connection with the person he's actually talking to. Let's put in our contracts that our providers have to act in this way. Let's get more funding for parent partners. Did it. Let's do that kind of stuff, you know? Every one of us in our own space. So let me be clear to you. Are there barriers? 100%. Am I asking you to change the whole dang world? No, I'm not. But in your practice, in your daily work, in your area of influence, I need you to stand up and say, this is not working. We need an extension. This is not working. I need more flexible funding. This is not working. I need this kind of connection. Do it in your sphere of influence every day so you can look yourselves in the mirror at night and know that you did everything that you would wish to God had been done. Was it a child that you loved? Because that is not how we are currently practicing.
Do you have some practical steps to do those things without doing that secondary trauma to yourself?
Yes.
When you meet that resistance.
Now we're going to go to mindset and practice shifts. Okay. So we are shifting 2 things. We're shifting the way we think and then the way we do. And what we've learned is you have to first change the way people think, and then they do it differently, right? The way you treat people you can't stand and the way you treat people you love is just different, right? So change the mindset first and the behavior follows. So what is the mindset shift? We're starting to think about parents as also needing healing, not punishment, right? Not continually working in the way that we are judging and punishing, but instead showing up with curiosity and empathy. That's a big one. Harm to the children is a pain-based behavior, right? So understanding that pain-based behavior is showing up for parents and for children. That is not an expected way to respond. Humans are not born thinking to hurt one another. It's not how it goes, right? And so that is a sign of pain-based behavior, and it requires some empathy. We are also looking for ways to increase our risk tolerance and decrease risk to families. They are bearing and shouldering all of the risk right now. So what could we do and still feel safe? How can we make this happen? What would it take? What would it take for you to keep this family together and still feel safe, right? How could you show up and answer the news? I always like that question. It's like, if I was on the news tonight, would a reasonable person believe that I took reasonable action, right? Could I defend it on the 5 o'clock? That's how I practice. So thinking about that, how do we share risk? Another one, we're expanding the definition of safety. It's not okay just to be safe, they have to feel safe. And to feel safe, they have to know that they are connected and tethered. So if we want to keep all kids safe, we just put them in cages and poof, we're done. Is there anything wrong with that definition? Right? We are creating lifelong harm because just because you are safe doesn't mean you feel safe, and that changes your brain. So the work we do should not harm anybody, including ourselves. So really thinking about what we need to be able to do the work. So I do a whole nother piece, and I'm really a huge proponent of workforce well-being. Because I don't know about you, but I am no good to anybody when I'm exhausted. I'm not very nice, actually. And so if we're not taking care of ourselves, we have very little to offer. And actually the research is really clear on this. The research says that if you're feeling burned out, you under-evaluate safety risks. You under-evaluate safety if you're tired, because it's like, look, if I think you're really at risk, then I have to do something about it, and I got too much to do and I'm exhausted. You're fine, you're fine. And if I feel terrible, then I'm like, you're fine, it's not that serious. So it does harm when we're not well, and we can really miss safety risks as well. So taking care of ourselves is a big part of the new way of work. It's not selfish, it's not something that we do when we have time. It is a primary tool we use, is our own regulation and our own well-being. Also mindset shifting around this idea that long-term pain is healed in brief short-term solutions, right? It takes a long time to get there, it takes a long time to get out. And also shifting our mindset around out of home doesn't mean out of family. So no out of family placement. Think about that in a different way. So we search until we find people they know and love or to whom they are related. And we don't release ourselves from that after looking at a few diligent places. In shifting practice, we start to think about prevention. We start thinking about building strong parents, strong families, and strong communities before harm occurs. We think about how do we support parents so they can support children instead of how do we support children, right? What would it take for the parents to be able to do it? We start holding relational connections as sacred, and when we disrupt a family bond, we have consulted on it so significantly that we treat it as a nuclear option, and we have literally nothing else to do. So you can remove a child from a home and not disrupt a relational bond. You can have a child living safely with someone else and maintain an emotional connection, right? There are so many ways to do that. I'd love to spend the time talking about them, and I'll give you specifics if you got one, but essentially our connections are based on all of our senses. It doesn't have to be just living with someone. We're focusing not on compliance and punishment, but on the healing power of relationships and empathy. And we're also going to be expanding our work with our partners. We're going to be doing work in child welfare with housing and economic supports. We're going to be doing work with related to criminal justice. We're going to be looking at all, healthcare and addiction treatment, because it's going to take all of those in order for parents to safely parent. So what I recommend doing right now is building connections with related systems. Building friendships in those related kinds of, in housing and economic support. Start taking people out for coffee. Start figuring out how you can work together. Talk about your shared problems, because you're going to be moving to shared solutions. Having accountability and acknowledgement of the systemic and implicit bias in our work. Looking for ways to root out racist behaviors that are part of our implicit work in child welfare. Our numbers look the way they do for reasons. I just saw a release this week that they are finding that some of the healthcare formulas that determine who gets additional support and who doesn't were developed by all white people and have an implicit racial bias, which means that it turns out the formula the computer spits out is that white folks need more help than black and brown folks, which was done with implicit bias. So having the right people at the table while you're making decisions. Sharing power with families, asking them to come up with their solutions, their supports, and helping make that safely possible. And really thinking in practice about, and in supervision, about good, strong self-care strategies as a part of measurement of good practice. It's not just meeting your numbers, it's not just meeting your timelines, it's if you have to do it but you're in shambles at the end, that is not rewardable behavior. And right now we wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. We wear busyness like it's an award. And so we need to redirect our thinking about that, because we can't help others if we can't help ourselves. In our practice shift, we're going to be really integrating networks of trusted and aligned partnerships in all of these areas. And so thinking about our work in a very, very different way that talks about basic needs, because if you don't have safe places to live, if you don't have enough food, you don't feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, you can't keep other people safe. And then really lowering our caseloads whenever possible, doing the movement of, right now we're in an interminable bond, right? It's like the more we take out, the busier we are, the less we have to stop taking kids out. And so we have got to start figuring ways to move kids out of this system to redirect the resources to the front end. And I also think we're, kind of predicting out to the future that we're going to have more reliance on integrative healing services, less reliance on strictly talk therapy, especially as a primary form of intervention, and starting to understand more the mind-body connection of trauma and the mind-body connection of healing. So another thing to do would be to do some of those things yourself, to start working on that yourself and become familiar with them so that you understand them for people who we work with. We've written a healing guidebook, which is an 89-page free downloadable guidebook on helping kids heal. It's sort of the new way of work, the new healing for relational trauma, and you can download that at our website as well. We also have published the innovation cohort results, the early results, and now the year results will be coming out in probably a month. And what we found after 1 year of work in these 5 systems, not changing the funding, not changing the roles, not changing the laws, is that one system reduced their kids in out-of-home care by 2/3, another by 45%, another residential placements by 43%. And so it doesn't have to take a massive shift of structure and money. You can do it by changing the way you think and practice within the current guidelines and bounds. And I have one last thing to do before you leave. We partner with the Brave New Workshop that is the nation's longest running improv theater, empirical improv theater in the country. And they gifted us something that helps get trauma out of the body. And because this is so heavy and such a big lift to do in a short period, I would love you to do something with me. And as we recall, when you feel like you don't belong and you're isolated, it's dangerous and can be fatal. So I